The dust rose in lazy spirals along the dirt road leading into town, carried by the same dry wind that had been blowing across the Montana plains for 3 days straight. Eli Dawson stood on the porch of his modest ranch house, one boot propped against the railing, his hat pulled low against the afternoon sun. He watched the stagecoach approach with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness that no wild stallion or winter storm had ever managed to stir in him. He had written the letter 6 months ago, sitting at the same kitchen table where his mother used to roll biscuit dough before the fever took her. His father had passed 2 years before that, and the ranch had become a kingdom of silence. The cattle didn't talk back, the horses offered no opinions on the weather, and the only human voice Eli heard most days was his own, muttering commands to his border collie, Duke. So when his neighbor's wife suggested he write to a matrimonial agency back east, he had swallowed his pride and done it. He described himself honestly. 31 years old, brown hair, green eyes, tall but not handsome enough to brag about, a working ranch with 200 head of cattle, a solid house, and a good well. He promised kindness, stability, and a life that would never include hunger or cold. He did not promise love, because he thought it presumptuous to promise something he wasn't sure he knew how to give. Her letters had come like small gifts wrapped in careful penmanship. Her name was Clara Whitfield, and she was 24, originally from Pennsylvania. She wrote about books she had read and flowers she hoped to grow. She mentioned a younger brother she was leaving behind, and a life she described only as difficult. Eli noticed she never wrote about her parents, and he didn't press. Everyone carried something they didn't want to unpack in a letter. The stagecoach pulled to a stop in front of the general store, and Eli walked down the road to meet it. He had cleaned his best shirt and shaved that morning, cutting himself twice below the jaw. He held a small bunch of wildflowers he had picked from the meadow behind the barn, feeling foolish holding them, but unable to think of what else to bring. The driver climbed down and opened the door, and a woman stepped out into the Montana sunlight. She was smaller than Eli had imagined, with dark hair pinned beneath a bonnet that had seen better days. Her dress was gray and worn at the cuffs, and she carried a single carpetbag that looked like it contained everything she owned in the world. But it was her eyes that stopped Eli mid-step. They were large and brown and beautiful, and they were filled with a fear so deep it looked like it had been living there for years. She looked at him the way a deer looks at a hunter, calculating the distance between where she stood and any possible escape. Her fingers were white around the handle of her carpetbag, and when the stagecoach driver set down a small trunk beside her, she flinched at the sound it made hitting the ground. Eli felt something shift inside his chest. He had seen that look before, in horses that had been broken by cruel hands, in dogs that cowered when you raised an arm to wave. It was the look of a creature that had learned to expect pain from the people who were supposed to offer shelter. He stopped a few paces away from her, giving her room the way he would give room to a frightened animal. He took off his hat so she could see his face clearly, and he spoke in the same low, steady voice he used when approaching a spooked mare. "You must be Clara. I'm Eli Dawson. I'm real glad you're here." She nodded but didn't speak. Her eyes moved over him quickly, assessing his size, his hands, the breadth of his shoulders. He could almost hear her thoughts measuring how much damage a man his size could do. He held out the wildflowers. "These are for you. They're not much, but they're the best the meadow had to offer this time of year." She took them slowly, her fingers trembling. "Thank you," she whispered, and her voice was like a thread pulled too tight, ready to snap. "Darlin'," Eli said gently, a soft smile crossing his weathered face, "I don't bite, unless you count the way I go after my neighbor's apple pie at the church social. Mrs. Henderson says I eat like a man who's been starved for a week, and she's not entirely wrong." Something flickered in Clara's eyes. Not quite a smile, but the faintest shadow of one, like sunlight trying to break through heavy clouds. He picked up her trunk and loaded it into the wagon, then offered her his hand to help her up onto the seat. She hesitated before taking it, and when her small hand rested in his, he felt how cold her fingers were despite the warm afternoon. He didn't squeeze, he simply held steady and let her pull herself up. They rode in silence for the first mile. Eli pointed out landmarks along the way, keeping his voice easy and unhurried. The river where he fished in the summer, the ridge where you could see 3 mountain ranges on a clear day, the old oak tree that had been struck by lightning twice and still refused to die. "Stubborn tree," Clara said quietly, and Eli glanced at her. "Stubbornness has its virtues," he replied. When they arrived at the ranch, Duke bounded off the porch to greet them, his tail wagging with the unrestrained joy that only dogs can manage. Clara knelt down, and the dog pushed his nose into her hand. For the first time, Eli saw her face soften, the tension around her mouth easing as she stroked Duke's ears. "He likes you," Eli said. "Duke's a good judge of character, better than most people I know." He showed her around the house, pointing out the bedroom he had prepared for her. He had bought new curtains from the general store and a quilt from the widow Perkins, who was known for her needlework. Fresh flowers sat in a jar on the nightstand. "This is your room," Eli said. "Mine is down the hall. I want you to know that nothing changes about that arrangement until you say otherwise. There's a lock on the door, and the key is yours." Clara stared at the lock, then at him. Her eyes glistened, and she blinked rapidly. "You put a lock on the door?" she said, as though she couldn't quite believe it. "A person ought to feel safe in their own home," Eli said simply. That first week, Clara moved through the house like a ghost, quiet and watchful. She cooked meals that were far better than anything Eli had managed on his own, and she cleaned with a thoroughness that suggested keeping busy was a form of survival. Eli made sure to announce himself before entering a room, to keep his movements slow and predictable, and to never ever raise his voice, even when a coyote got into the chicken coop and he lost 2 hens. He noticed things, the way she startled at sudden sounds, the way she watched his hands when he spoke, the faded bruise on her wrist that her sleeve didn't quite cover, yellow-green and healing, a map of someone else's cruelty written on her skin. He didn't ask. He figured she would tell him when she was ready, or she wouldn't, and either way it was her story to share or keep. On the 8th night, a thunderstorm rolled across the plains. Eli was reading by the fire when he heard a sound from Clara's room, a small, muffled cry. He went to her door and knocked softly. "Clara, it's just thunder. You're safe." The door opened a crack. Her face was pale, her eyes red. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to disturb you." "You didn't disturb me. Storm's a loud one tonight. Would you like some tea? I make terrible tea, but it's warm, and that counts for something." She followed him to the kitchen and sat at the table while he boiled water. The wind howled outside and rain lashed against the windows, but inside the kitchen it was warm and bright. Duke lay at Clara's feet, his chin resting on her shoe. "He named my uncle," Clara said suddenly, staring into her cup. "After my parents died, he took me and my brother in. He was not a kind man." She paused. "I answered your advertisement because I needed to get far away. I was afraid you would be like him. I was afraid any man would be like him." Eli sat across from her and wrapped both hands around his own cup. "I'm sorry for what you went through, Clara. No one should have to live like that. I can't undo what happened to you, Clara, but I can promise you this. In this house, you will never have a reason to be afraid." She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for the lie, for the hidden cruelty, for the trap. She found none. "I believe you," she said softly. The storm passed, as storms do. In the weeks that followed, Clara began to change, slowly, like the land changes when winter finally loosens its grip. She laughed at Duke's antics. She planted a garden along the south side of the house. She started leaving her bedroom door unlocked at night. And one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, she reached over and took Eli's hand. He held it gently, the way you hold something precious, and he felt her fingers warm against his for the first time. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them had become a comfortable thing, no longer empty, but full of something growing, something patient, something that looked remarkably like the beginning of love.